This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on Indo-Nepal bilateral relations. The participants are K.V. Rajan, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Ambassador Rajan, when you see the India-Nepal bilateral relation, which in the recent past has also seen a few strains in it, how significant do you think is the visit of the Nepalese Prime Minister to India, where he has met our Prime Minister Narendra Modi? The bilateral issues have been discussed. How do you interpret the significance of this visit?
Well, the visit took place at a very sensitive time, both in the context of Nepal's internal developments and in the context of India-Nepal relations. Nepal is on the verge of writing its constitution. The process is still on. In a couple of more months' time, they will be having general elections, also the provincial elections to the new provinces, because Nepal is now going to be a federation. And it's been a long and very difficult process. The previous Constituent Assembly could not complete its task, so it was dissolved. New elections were held, and this Constituent Assembly has been struggling to complete the job. In the meantime, because India was trying to advise Nepal to make sure that all sections of the Nepalese population could be carried along and the constitution was as inclusive as possible, that advice was somewhat misunderstood, and there was an agitation by the Madheshis on the border with India, which some people in Nepal thought was instigated by India. So it led to a lot of serious misunderstandings between India and Nepal. So this visit was intended basically to convey signals all around getting back to normal very soon inside Nepal and also in the context of India-Nepal relations, to put a lot of projects which have been hanging fire for a long time back on track, and also to clear any misunderstandings that might still be there between the two countries. So it was at an important time, and it has been a very successful visit, I would say.
Ambassador Rajan, when the Madhesi protests took place, that was probably the toughest period in the bilateral relationships, because Nepal, not so much officially, but there were a lot of public statements which did blame India as being behind the blockade, and there were protests. Do you feel that India and Nepal, both countries, have overcome that strain? Today there is a feeling in both nations that we can overcome what India was saying, that the constitution is not inclusive enough, and Nepal came out and said that, one, it is an internal matter and that we will make an amendment to accommodate the rights of Madhesis and other communities in Nepal. Do you feel that is behind as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned?
I think the two countries are facing several challenges in their bilateral relationship. It has a lot to do with perceptions in both countries about each other, and sometimes those perceptions reflect reality also. For example, in India, there is a growing perception, a fairly widespread perception, that Nepal is not sensitive enough to India's legitimate security concerns. Nepal is getting too close to China, disregarding the fact that India-China relations are not really going through a very good phase. And in Nepal, there has been this perception which has been also growing. India has something of a big brother attitude. So both sides, there are these misunderstandings, and partly it is a backlog of accumulated perceptions, grievances, irritants of the past, partly the result of recent developments to which you referred. It will take a lot of sensitive handling and management to completely get rid of some of these misunderstandings. But I would say a good beginning has been made, and some credit should be given to the previous Prime Minister, Mr. Prachanda also, because he also tried his best during his short tenure to clear the air of any misunderstandings. And Mr. Deopa, the current Prime Minister of Nepal, has taken that task forward. So the atmosphere is certainly much better, and there is a lot of focus now on development, while discussions on security are also continuing. So if these ideas which have been identified, projects which have been identified in the field of development could be implemented quickly, then I think India-Nepal relations will again be on a totally normal track.
For that matter, when we talk of India and its relationship with its immediate neighbors, one country that always comes into the equation is China. And India and Nepal, there seems to be again China standing somewhere, maybe in the middle or somewhere tilting towards one thing. The previous Nepalese Prime Minister was also accused of being more pro-Beijing than being pro-New Delhi. How do you see the role of China influencing the India-Nepal relationship, because India has always maintained, and so has Nepal, that this is a very ancient, historic relationship. And we see the entry of a very aggressive, economically strong China, which really wants Nepal on its side. And we've seen that Nepal has actually joined the ambitious One Belt, One Road initiative of China, which India has refused to endorse.
The India-China-Nepal set of interactions has been going on for many decades, right from the beginning. And one of the first countries which India had to worry about when it became independent was Nepal because of the China factor. And let us not forget that the Chinese action in Tibet happened very soon after our independence. And India always tried to ensure that Nepal would not play the China card in such a way that Indian sensitivities would be ignored or Indian security interests would be undermined. And Nepal, for its part, has shown the typical psyche of a small neighbor. It feels it is completely overwhelmed by India's cultural influence, economic influence, political influence, the size, everything. And so it constantly tries to over-assert its national identity. And its geopolitical location comes in very handy because, the moment it starts talking about China, India becomes very worried. Now, of late, what has been happening is that China has increasingly gained in its own self-confidence. Stunning economic progress that it has made. The fact that it is now really the second most important economy in the world and in a few years' time is likely to be the most important economy. It wants to play what it perceives as its natural role in the world on the global stage. It considers itself, it has this Middle Kingdom tradition, mentality or self-image as it were, which is coming back. And under its present leadership, China wants to assert that, and it is not ashamed or shy in asserting that. And so it is not just in Nepal, but all around us, you find China is increasing its profile, raising its profile. You see it in the Maldives, in Sri Lanka. Pakistan, of course, is already there. Bangladesh. So it is not unexpected that China is raising its profile in Nepal. What is of concern to India is that Nepal seems to be playing along with China's game, partly because of the psychological resistance that it has to expanding its dependence on India, partly due to mismanagement of relations on one side or the other in recent years, or the style or the perception or the misperception, whatever you would like to call it. But the fact of the matter is that anti-Indianism, which was restricted to a very small section of the Nepalese population in the Kathmandu Valley, has now spread far and wide in Nepal. And there is no part of Nepal where people don't seem to have some inhibitions about India, despite India's best intentions. And the only way of, I think, resolving this problem is for India to completely reimagine its relationship with Nepal. It's a completely different Nepal, no longer a monarchy, it is going to become a federation. So India should treat Nepal now in a different way to the one it has been used to all these past decades. And once that happens, I think India-Nepal relations will be on an even keel. And China can never replace India as true friend of Nepal, or in terms of Nepal's dependence on any other country. So India does not really need to worry about China replacing India beyond a point. It has to play its own cards much more smartly and much better than it has perhaps in recent years.
Ambassador Rajan, we also see that the government since the last 3 years has also pushed forward a policy which we have called the Neighbourhood First policy. And we saw the beginning with the swearing-in ceremony of the Prime Minister when he invited all the SAARC leaders to come and attend. And there has been an approach by the government that the neighbourhood should be the priority. We should extend our cooperation and better relationships with all our neighbours. Look at Nepal, despite the fact that when the earthquake happened, India was one of the first countries to reach out. We were very generous in our aid and the support. Despite that fact, as you point out, the anti-India sentiment still continues. When you look at the Neighbourhood First policy and then you look at the India-Nepal relation, what is it you feel that India can perhaps do to better this bilateral relationship?
India has to accept the fact that no matter what it does to support its neighbors in the fulfillment of their aspirations, in their hopes for development, etc. India should not expect gratitude in return. India should just do its bit of managing relations with each country so that there is no sense of Indian interference and they feel that they are being given their sovereign space. I think that is the real problem throughout our neighborhood, that small countries feel somehow that India is sort of too influential in their internal affairs. Now, India can't help its size, but it can certainly adjust the style of its diplomacy so that its neighbors feel much more at ease and they are more comfortable. And I think in the case of Nepal now, for example, instead of everything being done at the level of the governments in Delhi and Kathmandu, we should now realize that people are very important. People-to-people relations have to be given much greater importance, a greater sense of urgency. Ultimately, if the people-to-people relations are nurtured properly, the people will ensure that the governments also are not anti-India, etc., etc. And this has been in my own experience as ambassador in Nepal. I found that people-to-people relations played a very, very important role in correcting any distortions in the official level relationship. And now, with Nepal becoming a federation, you can deal with the local governments, the provinces, you can have sister city relations, you can build institutions at the local level. And India itself, you have a marvelous spectacle of so many states competing with each other to attract investment, to attract trade, etc. So I think there has to be much greater decentralization, and that I hope will take away some of the tension in the bilateral relationship.
Ambassador Rajan, what we have also seen in Nepal is that there has been a lot of domestic internal stability, what we call that. Nepal itself, we've seen the Prime Minister's change with a great frequency, and that has been a cause of concern. We have seen that internally also something or the other keeps happening in Nepal. Do you feel that their domestic instability, of course, as India protested that it affects our security, it also somewhere puts a shadow on the India-Nepal relationship?
There's nothing new in domestic instability in Nepal. But there again we found that important treaties on water resources could be signed. They could even be ratified by more than two-thirds majority of the Nepal parliament. Despite changes of government, because of the people-to-people. Once the people of Nepal realized that India was doing something not to serve its own interests or to satisfy a particular friend of India who is Prime Minister, but was doing something for the good of Nepal, they would not tolerate any anti-Indianism or any threat to India's security. After the unfortunate hijacking of the Indian Airlines plane in 1999, the people-to-people relations itself was badly dented because people in India began to have grave doubts about Nepal respecting India's security concerns. That has to be set right. And I think we should concentrate on people-to-people relations and encourage young people particularly to go in much larger numbers to each other's universities, colleges, schools, etc. Stay at people's homes, the homes of families. Otherwise, if you restrict everything only to the government-to-government level, I'm afraid this problem will continue.
Mr. Rajan, we've also seen that Doklam continues in the backdrop, and even though officially there was no discussion on this issue, do you feel that China could bring upon India's neighbors to somehow take a stand on the issue, or do you think that the neighbors like India, like Bhutan, like Nepal, will most probably remain more or less neutral?
Countries like Nepal and Bhutan will in fact worry a lot about China, not about India, because they have seen for themselves the kind of problems that China can cause. But China will try to influence these countries not to be neutral, but to be more positively inclined to what China is doing. China will also try to instigate problems in regard to India's own border issues with countries like Nepal. We have to be on our guard against it, and it's a question of diplomatic management, which I think we are doing very well. So I don't think we need to worry too much on that score.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Indo-Nepal bilateral relations. The participants were K.V. Rajan, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.